Hey, welcome to something that's a little bit different for this channel, and by different, I mean it's not just a Let's Play equivalent of a shitpost. So, as you can probably gather from the title of the video, I'm going to be listing my top 20 favourite games of the last decade, since I sure as hell did play a bunch of them. I've always wanted to make a video in this format, but I've never had much of an idea for one before. But now, with the decade coming to an end, I'll be counting down my top 20 favourite games of the last decade, which means that any game that released between 2010 and now can make the list. I'll also be giving honourable mentions to some games that didn't quite make the list, but I thought were really good games nonetheless. These aren't really reviews, more like my own personal rambly thoughts on them. Also, I legally have to mention that these are my own opinions, so you may not agree with everything on the list. So if a game that you really think should be on the list isn't there, then don't get upset. Plus, I don't play a lot of AAA games, and I also do not own any of the major consoles like PlayStation 4, Xbox One, or the Nintendo Switch. I play video games nearly exclusively on PC, and not really anywhere else. By the way, this might be kind of a long video since, like I said, I sure did play a bunch of games this last decade, and I got a bunch of stuff to say about them as well. So, with that all out of the way, let's get started by going over my honourable mentions. Papers, Please is a game that has one idea and executes that idea really well. You work as an immigration officer at a border checkpoint in the great country of Arstotzka, checking people's IDs and documents and deciding whether or not these people will be allowed into the country. The gameplay is comprised of comparing each person's documents to a set of ever-expanding rules that you have and finding the contradictions between them. This gets tricky, however, when the game also throws moral choices at you that will affect the outcome of the story. It gets increasingly harder to stay on the straight path when you are being bribed or threatened. I really enjoy the gameplay in this, however it's not for everyone. I won't lie, it looks pretty boring initially, but the setting and themes just hooked me, and I can definitely see why this game has such positive reviews. Return of the Obra Dinn, which is made by the same person that made Papers, Please, is a game I was waiting for a very long time. I remember playing the original demo back when it first came out and being wowed by what was there. The idea of travelling back in time to the moment a person died in order to figure out their death is an interesting enough idea, but expanding on that idea and having to figure out how the entire crew of a ship disappeared by using this makes for a pretty great game. My biggest gripe with the game is the somewhat lackluster ending. I won't spoil anything, but after everything else that happens throughout the whole game, the ending felt a little bit underwhelming. It's still a great game and I absolutely recommend it for those of you who are into solving puzzles detective style. Stardew Valley is kind of a weird one for me, since even though I really enjoyed it when I first played through it, I know now that I wouldn't be able to deal with what is in my opinion, a really slow start to the game. I first played through it during the summer of 2016 with my sister. At the time, the game didn't have co-op, so we each had our own save file and both played the game on the same PC. What made it really fun was that my sister would play the game while I was at work and I would play once I got home, and we would ask each other if we had found this thing or seen this event or obtained this item and so on. Due to the massive amount of content in the game, the events or items that me and my sister would find would differ greatly, and we would give each other advice on how to do so and so or how to get an event or trigger. Eventually we did sync our saves up after roughly putting in 50 hours each, and for me that was where the game started to get stale, but I still greatly enjoyed my time in the game. I want to quickly mention that all 5 of the Ace Attorney games that came out this decade were all absolute bangers. Technically there are 6, but one of them hasn't got the translation from Japanese yet, so I haven't played it. I enjoyed all of them greatly. My favourite is probably Spirit of Justice, but the Great Ace Attorney is pretty hot too. Apex Legends is one of the only 2 big multiplayer games I play anymore, and for good reason. It's pretty fun. Me and my friends started playing the game pretty much right after it came out, and it was quite different to the Battle Royale games that we had played prior. Firstly, it was a lot faster, like a lot. The ping system that it introduced to the genre is absolutely god tier, and I don't know how Battle Royale games survived without it. The different abilities of all the characters are also super fun and allow for a bunch of chaotic combinations on the battlefield. There are 2 reasons that it didn't make the list, however, and those are: 1, I have to use the Origin launcher to play it, which for some reason likes to just randomly alt-tab me out of the game, and 2, because I'm pretty fucking bad at the game. I don't know what it is I do wrong, but every 3 matches out of 4, I feel like I get completely and utterly outmatched by the opposing teams. Regardless, Apex Legends is still a really good battle royale, and I would recommend you give it a shot if you haven't yet. It's also free. It's a free Bibby game. Obtain. Ghost Trick Phantom Detective is a story-focused game that starts off really strong. You are dead, your lifeless body is in between a gunman and a girl you don't recognize. You also can't remember anything about who you were or how you died. Oh, and also, you are a ghost now. I mean, that should be obvious, it's in the title of the game, but yeah, that's all I really want to say about this game, is I don't really want to spoil one of the, in my opinion, best stories in gaming any more than I need to. If you have the means to play this, which you should, because it's a DS game, and you really should, as you'd be missing out on a real gem otherwise. Celeste was seemingly everybody's favourite platformer of 2018. Don't get me wrong, I did really enjoy it, which is kinda obvious since it's on this list, but I didn't get into it as much as I felt like I should have. It's strange to say, but I wanted to enjoy the game more than I did, and to be perfectly honest, I'm not really sure why I didn't. I love the core platforming, the controls feel responsive and tight, I love the dash ability and all of the new mechanics surrounding it that are gradually added to the game. I like the story that focuses on mental health issues, the music is also pretty good. And really, that's all I can say about Celeste. I enjoyed it enough, but something didn't quite click for me. Known for its 80s aesthetic, its colourful visuals, its hyper-violence, and absolutely banging soundtrack, the Hotline Miami series can be considered one of the more well-known indie hits of the last decade. I'm grouping both the first game and the sequel, Wrong Number, in here, because while I do think that the original game is overall better, I still do like the second one. Also, the second game's soundtrack is just a little bit hotter than the first one. I love the story that is told over the course of these games. However, if there wasn't some incredibly well done fan videos on YouTube that explain the story in a more linear fashion, there is no way on earth that I could have pieced the whole thing together. As the story in the actual games is quite confusing, to say the least. The real place that these games shine, though, is the gameplay. The combat in these games is based on quick reactions and on-the-spot planning. The first game has a fairer difficulty curve in my opinion, as it focuses much more on melee combat and smaller levels, whereas Wrong Number has more guns and much larger levels where it's a lot easier to be shot from an area that you can't see off screen, which can be pretty frustrating. The first game also has more replay value, as once you unlock all the ability masks, you can use them on almost any level in the game, which you can't do in the sequel. All in all though, these are two stellar games, and if you're looking for some 80s action, you can't go wrong with the Hotline Miami series. Risk of Rain 2 is a game that I originally wasn't going to include in this list because it's fairly new and I only really started getting into it, but I'm enjoying it so much that I'm going to include it in this list anyway, because who can stop me? The list police? Risk of Rain 2 takes the original Risk of Rain, which I didn't care for that much if I'm being honest, and recreated it in 3D. I don't understand how a roguelike third-person shooter can work so damn well, but here we are. I've been playing constantly with my brother, and I love just how overpowered you can get as runs go on. The game is still in early access, so it doesn't have a proper ending yet. You just try to see how long you'll survive until you die. It has online co-op up to 4 players, which is nearly always a plus. A few other honourable mentions that I think should at least be mentioned are Heat Signature, which is Space Hotline Miami, Factorio, which is Crack Cocaine the Game, Satisfactory, which is Crack Cocaine the Game 2.0, Duck Game, which is absolute multiplayer madness, Streets of Rogue, Deus Ex and GTA had a child, and it's a roguelike, The Hex, play games from the perspective of the characters themselves, Pony Island, but what if Satan made a game? Cortex Command, an ambitious but janky game about fighting over resources on worlds with fully destructible terrain, Gunpoint, a stealthy game about rewiring things where you can also push people through glass, Just Cause 3, attach a bus to a helicopter and use it as a wrecking ball, Mad Max, car combat done correctly, N++, a precision platformer that will show you no mercy, Portal Stories Mel, a high-quality fan game, which is free, The Stanley Parable, walking simulator perfected, SteamWorld Heist, a strategy game where you gotta bounce bullets around, and Surgeon Simulator, a game about how surgeries are not meant to be performed. Now, with all of the honourable mentions out of the way, we can move on to the actual list of my top 20 favourite games of the decade, starting with number 20. When I started this list, there are a few games that I knew I was going to include, and PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds was one of those games. I mean, it's my most played game on Steam for crying out loud, of course it was going to be here. I'm probably not the only person with this opinion, but I believe that PUBG is what truly kickstarted the Battle Royale genre back in 2017, and despite Battle Royale becoming huge with things like Fortnite and Counter-Strike Danger Zone, I still haven't played anything like PUBG. PUBG is the slow, realistic Battle Royale. Please note that I'm using the word realistic very liberally. The maps in PUBG are friggin' huge, and unless you hot drop like some kind of idiot, then generally not much will happen during the first 10 to 20 minutes of a PUBG match, which I understand can be a huge turn-off for some people. Even I myself at this point have grown tired of the incredibly slow pace of the game, which is one of the main reasons I don't actually play much PUBG anymore. The other reason being that all my friends have moved on to Apex Legends. But the best part of PUBG for me will always be the final few circles. There is nothing more intense than firefights in the last quarter of any given PUBG match, the problem being of course that you need to survive that long. I also don't think any other Battle Royale game has really done vehicles in the way PUBG has, although to be fair I've only played like 4 different Battle Royale games, but still. A huge chunk of the player base seemingly never stops complaining about all of the updates that the game has gotten, and you know, I just straight up don't agree. For me, not a single one of the game's updates has ever been bad, and I honestly think that Bluehole has at least done a reasonable job with the upkeep. So yeah, I greatly enjoyed my time with PUBG, and I doubt that I'll ever come across anything that's quite like it ever again, which is why it's my 20th favourite game of the decade. Subnautica is a game that I played quite a while after it had come out. The game released in early access in late 2014, and I didn't play until roughly 4 years later when it was given away for free on the Epic Games Store. As a big fan of open world survival games, I have no idea how I hadn't played or at least been interested in Subnautica before then. The premise of the game is that you have crash landed on an alien planet, and you are seemingly the sole survivor of the crash. You have only emergency rations, your escape pod is busted up, and so is the radio that is located inside of said escape pod. Oh, and also, it appears that there is just straight up no land on this planet, only water. From there, your main objective is to fix your escape pod and radio to see if you can contact any other survivors, or, more importantly, someone to help you get off this planet. Thankfully, your handy PDA managed to survive the crash and is ready to guide you through surviving this hostile new world. Early on, you get a scanner tool that lets you scan local fauna and debris from the crashed ship to learn new crafting recipes, which in turn allow you to navigate the dangerous waters of this world better. The core gameplay loop of Subnautica is find and scan stuff that will let you craft stuff that will let you dive deeper, or you can scan new stuff that will let you craft stuff that will let you dive deeper, and so on and so forth, while making sure to maintain your food and water intake. The main 4 things that separate Subnautica from other survival games, however, is its setting, its world, its atmosphere, and the fact that it tasks you with actually trying to reach an end goal, which a lot of other survival games don't do, or do very minimally. As far as I'm aware, as far as the setting goes, there are a few other games that match the underwater feeling as well as Subnautica does. The movement perfectly emulates what it feels like to be swimming underwater, while the visuals gorgeously convey Subnautica's underwater world. Subnautica's world, or more precisely, its map, unlike most, if not all other games in the genre, is not randomly generated. Whether it's your first time playing the game or the 5th, the map will remain the same. Since the developers were able to handcraft this map, they are also able to guide the player in a way that a randomly generated map wouldn't. Having an end goal also separates Subnautica from its peers quite a bit, as while other games in the genre do have end goals, they are usually more of a suggestion rather than an actual objective. But from the moment you land on the planet, you've only got one goal: to get the hell off of it. Once you complete your goal, you're done. There's little incentive for you to go back and mess around and save where you already finished the game. Now, this might be a negative for some people, and I can totally see where those people are coming from, but for me, I do enjoy the feel of having actually completed the game. Finally, I want to talk about Subnautica's atmosphere. I'm going to have to level with you here, I'm a big wuss. Like, I cannot play scary games at all. I get way too stressed out and I can't deal with the anticipation of the next jump scare. Subnautica is debatably the scariest game on this list. Well, maybe scary is the wrong word, creepy might be a better fit. In my entire 40-hour playthrough of the game, the moments where I wasn't feeling on edge were few and far between. The first time I ever saw one of the Leviathans, I noped the hell out of that area and didn't go back for a while. One of my most memorable moments in Subnautica is more or less thanks to the creepy atmosphere the game paints. So, I'm close to the end game and I've just built the big submarine, you know, the one that can more or less function as a mobile base of operations. So I decided to take it over to the area by the crashed Aurora ship because I noticed that there is a sudden steep drop on the seafloor and I don't feel confident going down there in nothing but my diving suit. So I get there and I keep going deeper and deeper and it seems like this area might just go on forever. I eventually get close to the pressure limit on my submarine and I'm not seeing anything of interest, so I decide to head back to my actual base so I can recharge the batteries for the sub. Suddenly, I get an alert from my submarine's user interface telling me that I'm under attack. What's attacking me? I don't know, because I can't see the damn thing. So, not wanting my new submarine to sink, I quickly start trying to get the hell out of there. The inside of the sub is flashing red lights and water is starting to come in through cracks in the hull. I still haven't seen what's attacking my submarine, and at this point I just want to get away from the thing. Just as I'm getting close to shallow waters, a second something starts attacking my submarine, and I realize it's over. Quickly, I leave the controls of my sub and get into my much smaller submarine that I parked inside of the bigger one and eject myself from the large submarine. As soon as I eject, I put some distance between myself and my big submarine and turn around just in time to watch it explode. Whatever it was that was attacking me had left before I turned around, so in the end I never did end up finding out what it was that attacked me. And thanks to that little ordeal, I ended up never going back to that area for the rest of the game. But it's things like that that made me decide to make Subnautica my 19th favourite game of the decade. Slay the Spire is a relative newcomer in the video game scene as it only just released earlier this year. Never did I think that a roguelike deck builder would work very well, let alone this well. I've only played 2 card games before, not including games that are just played with a standard deck of cards, which are Yu-Gi-Oh!, which I no longer fully understand because they kept on adding new rules, and Gwent from The Witcher 3, which I actually do quite like. I have roughly 50 hours logged into The Witcher 3, and at least 30 of those hours are from me just going around and playing Gwent with people. I'm not going to do an in-depth explanation of Slay the Spire since that would take a pretty long time, but the basic idea is that you start with a very basic deck of cards that contains things like strike cards that let you attack and defend cards which, surprise surprise, let you defend. The idea is that after every combat encounter in the game you are shown 3 new cards, one of which you may choose to add to your deck. So as you move up the spire and keep winning combat encounters, you will slowly add more and more cards to your deck, which sort of makes your deck turn into a complicated machine by the end. You can even get to a point where your deck is so powerful that you can beat all of the combat encounters on the first turn before they even get a chance to attack. This, however, usually doesn't happen because Slay the Spire is a really hard game. While I do have to admit that a little bit of that difficulty comes from random number generation, and that kind of sucks, most of it is done really well, and once you start figuring out the different enemies and monster attack patterns, you slowly figure out their weaknesses and which cards are best used against them. My favourite part of Slay the Spire is when you get so close to a game-breaking run, but you're missing just 1 or 2 cards to complete your deck, and each fight is a new puzzle where you have to figure out how to use your deck despite not having those cards. Slay the Spire makes having to do math fun, which is why it's my 18th favourite game of the decade. If you've played Doki Doki Literature Club, you probably know why it's on this list. If you haven't played the game, then all I'm going to tell you is that it's a regular dating simulator, but with a cool twist. I'm literally not going to say anything else about the game, besides that it's free on Steam, and that it's my 17th favourite game of the decade. Everyone's heard about Super Meat Boy, or at least I hope they have. Whenever I hear the word platformer, this is the first game to pop into my head. It's the hard as nails 2D platformer that is about a boy made of meat. It was probably the first difficult game that I ever really played. I've never played anything else that quite feels like Super Meat Boy. The only thing that has ever come close is Celeste, and that was in the honorable mentions. The running and the wall jumping feels so quick and responsive, and honestly, it's not even a very complicated game. Meat Boy only has a very small moveset, which is left and right movement, running and jumping. That's it. Sure, there are unlockable characters in the game that have things like dashes and triple jumps, but they aren't the focus. I'm fairly certain that all the levels, minus the ones where you actually unlock the extra characters, are designed around Meat Boy's simple moveset. Speaking of the levels, I'm pretty sure that the level design themselves are what carry most of the game. The main 6 worlds are filled with levels that to me feel perfectly designed and gave the game a brilliant difficulty curve. I also have to talk about the music. The games on this list so far have had okay to good music. Super Meat Boy's original soundtrack is amazing. Danny Baranowski, who is going to pop up on this list a few more times, makes, as far as I'm concerned, god-tier video game soundtrack. Super Meat Boy, in my opinion, is the best 2D platformer of the last decade, and that's why it's my 16th favourite game of the last decade. RimWorld is an RTS game about trying to manage a colony, but all the colonists are starving because a fire broke out which burned up all the food, there's a toxic fallout so no new food can grow, and also there's a pack of man-eating bears trying to smash down the front gate of the colony. In RimWorld, you start off with 3 colonists who have just crashed on a RimWorld, and from there you need to help them survive and thrive. They will need food, weapons, shelter, clothes, and eventually a way to uncrash themselves off of the planet. While the game may not have a lot going for it graphically, and the UI could maybe use a little touching up, I don't know any other game that is as detailed as RimWorld is. The game tells a new story every time you play it, and I'm not talking about a linear set story. Any and all story is told through the gameplay and shaped by your own interpretation of it. In one of my playthroughs, my entire colony burnt down to the ground because one of my colonists ended up drinking a bit too much, and then getting into a fight with one of the heaters. When the heater caught fire and set the room ablaze, the guy who started the fire quickly ran away as he was scared of fire, while the rest of my colonists were trapped in their rooms by the smoke and heat that was filling the entire base. Turns out that it's a fire hazard to have a base built entirely out of wood. Who knew? So yeah, RimWorld is a colony management game where anything can and will send your colony into a frenzied chaos, and that's why it's my 15th favourite game of the decade. Payday 2 is kind of a mess. I only played the original Payday the Heist briefly, and while I thought it was a fun Left 4 Dead alternative, it wasn't something I really got into. Payday 2 was the same. A friend of mine gifted me the game back in 2014, I think, and between then and 2018 I had barely played the game at all. I think I had roughly 15 to 20 hours of game time. It also didn't help that roughly 80% of the game's content was locked behind a bunch of different DLC packs of varying quality. Around mid-2018, however, I noticed that the DLCs were no longer listed on the store and were all bundled together under the name Ultimate Edition. I ended up picking up the Ultimate Edition while it was on sale, and that is when I really got into the game. In Payday 2, you and 3 other heisters rob banks, rob bigger banks, steal guns from rival cartels, cook meth, ruin motels, throw pallets of money out the back of a moving plane, steal some kind of mind control device from a moving train, party crash a concert, repair a motorbike, and steal a couple of nukes. The game is quite chaotic in all the missions it offers, and I know that some people aren't a fan of all the non-standard bank heists, but I really like the variety it offers. My favourite thing about Payday 2 is probably the feel of the running and gunning. Movement feels great, especially when using a fast build, and all the guns feel strong like guns should. Most enemies die from one shot to the head from nearly every gun, and there are 6, technically 7 difficulties to choose from to cater to your playstyle. The game also has a stealth system for some heists where you can choose to go loud, or try and go the way of the ninja and steal all of your loot without being seen by any of the guards or civilians. There are even some stealth mandatory heists in the game, and these range from really good at best to a headache at worst. I like the stealth system in the game, but I can't say it's without its flaws. Once again, similar to many of the other games on this list, Payday 2 has an awesome soundtrack to go along with its loud heists, most of it made by the great Simon Viklund, but there are also a few other names to be credited for some of the tracks. I basically played non-stop with my brother during the summer of 2018, and we had a blast trying to get all of the heists completed on Mayhem difficulty or above, which is why Payday 2 is my 14th favourite game of the decade.
Danganronpa.
Danganronpa was a gateway drug for me, because before I played the Danganronpa games, I was not into anime or weeb stuff at all, whereas now I would say that I'm kind of into anime. So yeah, this spot on the list is being shared by the 3 main Danganronpa games, Trigger Happy Havoc, Goodbye Despair, and Killing Harmony. If I had to include another episode, which is a spin-off game, then the series wouldn't have made it onto the list, because while I don't think that another episode is awful, I also don't think it's very good. So I didn't include it because once again, this is my list and who's gonna stop me. The Danganronpa games are all combinations of visual novels and detective games, and I am a big fan of games where I have to figure out contradictions in people's statements and figure out who done it. The premise of each game is very similar. You and a dozen or so other highly talented students are trapped within a school and are forced to participate in a killing game against your wishes. The only way to win this killing game is to kill someone and then get away with it. But once a murder has taken place, all of the students must take place in a class trial where they must all agree on a culprit. If they can't figure out who the culprit is, or if they vote incorrectly, the murderer will get away scot-free while everyone else is executed. If, however, the murderer is ousted during the class trial, only they will be executed and everyone else will continue living trapped within the school. It's this interesting premise that kept me hooked during all 3 games, plus each character, while at first may appear to be very simple or one-dimensional, throughout the game's story, you end up falling in love with the quirky cast of characters, only to be stabbed in the heart when one of your favourites turns out to be the murderer, or is, just straight up murdered. The main gameplay of Danganronpa is in the trials. All of the characters will literally start talking over each other in quick succession, and here you will have to use clues and evidence that you found during earlier investigations to find contradictions in other people's statements. You might also have to agree with other people and back them up to give their statements more validity. There are also some minigames thrown in here and there, but they're mildly entertaining at best and bring the fun trial gameplay to an abrupt halt at worst. But yeah, Danganronpa sort of turned me into a weeb, and that's why they're at my 13th spot on my favourite games of the decade list. Crypt of the Necrodancer is a rhythm roguelike game where you have to move to the beat or die. Prior to Crypt, the only other rhythm game that I'd ever played was Osu, and I wasn't very good at it. Then, Crypt of the Necrodancer came along and combined two of my favourite things, roguelites and Danny Baranowski's music. That's right, I told you I'd be bringing up old Danny Boy's music again. Gotta have good music if you want it to be one of the core aspects of the game, and Crypt of the Necrodancer sure does deliver with its soundtracks. The entire default soundtrack, which is by Danny Baranowski, is phenomenal and fits the mood of each level perfectly. I say default because there are more than 5 other soundtracks to choose from, each a different style remix of the default soundtrack. In my opinion, every single piece of music from this game is at least good, while some are freaking god tier. The gameplay in Crypt is very simple. You move in 4 directions on a tile-based grid. There is loot you can find that can change the way you move, but generally you will only ever be moving in the 4 directions. How you attack enemy all depends on which weapon you have. For example, if you have the default weapon, the dagger, then to attack an enemy you need to simply move towards where they are on the tile adjacent to yourself. If, however, you have the spear weapon, you could attack an enemy that is a tile apart from you by going in that direction. Every weapon in the game behaves differently, and you have to learn how to use them effectively to be able to progress in the game. The enemies are also something that you'll have to keep in mind if you want to improve, as each different type of monster has its own movement pattern and behaviours that you will have to learn in order to fight them. Now obviously, if this was all there was to the game, it would be an easy puzzle game at best. However, when you add a beat that you have to follow, things become quite a bit harder as you have to make quick decisions on the fly, or die trying. Crypt of the Necrodancer made dancing dangerous, and that's why it's my 12th favourite game of the decade. One Shot is another game that I'm not going to say much about, as if you've played the game, you know why it's on this list. If you haven't played the game, all I will say that it's an RPG that is aware of the player's existence, and you should absolutely jump in blind if you're into story-driven games. You only get one shot, and that's why it's my 11th favourite game of the decade. FTL is somewhat similar to RimWorld in the way that one minute everything on board your Federation ship can be fine and dandy, and then all of a sudden there are intruders on board, fires in the medbay, hull breaches in the oxygen production room, and missiles about to hit the shield generators. Upon noticing all this, you hit spacebar to pause the game so that you can collect your thoughts and figure out what to do in order to survive the freak chaos storm that is going to continue raging on your ship the second you unpause the game. FTL is a game about getting a spaceship equipped with a variety of useful things such as shields, drones, weapons, and most importantly, faster than light engines from point A to point B so that you can provide your allies in the Federation with some top secret information about how to defeat the rebels that are causing issues for you and your Federation friends. The issue being, however, that there are a lot of things in between point A and point B that are not so keen on you getting to point B in one piece. Along the way, you will come across pirates, mercenaries, and rebels, most of whom will try to stop you from getting to Federation space alive. The many random events that you will come across on your journey are great at spicing up the game, as each choice can drastically alter your current run. You may gain a new member to your crew or lose one of the ones you have already. You might find a weapon just floating in space ready to be installed, but it might turn out to be a trap. The combat between ships is brilliant, and I love how all of the different systems interact with one another during combat. You might want to take out your opponent's weapon systems first so that they can't fire at you anymore, or maybe you should take out their piloting so that they can't evade shots or run away. The game is very challenging. I've only beaten the game once on the normal difficulty and a handful of times on the easiest one. Plus, I still haven't unlocked all of the many ships that the game offers you, each with very different playstyles. FTL is incredibly good at what it does, and that's one of the reasons why it's my 10th favourite game of the decade. Grand Theft Auto 5 was another game that I knew I would have to put on this list. Right off the bat, I want to say that this is on the list solely for its single player offline content, as I've beaten the main storyline twice and have barely touched GTA Online. Grand Theft Auto 5 makes so many improvements over its predecessor. It nailed the feel of driving, which in the previous game was weird and drifty. It has a fun story, you're no longer a bullet sponge and you'll die after just a few shots. It added first person, it added light stealth mechanics, It overhauled the wanted system, and it had 3 main characters, which, I'll be honest with you, when this was first announced, I did not think they would be able to make it work. I thought it would just be an annoying gimmick. But being able to switch between Franklin, Michael, and Trevor is so much fun, and I end up always playing as if I'm that character. If I'm playing as Franklin, I'll drive around in fast cars and challenge the cops to see if they can catch me. If I'm playing as Michael, I'll play more cautiously. I'll do things like ride bikes and go diving. And if I'm playing as Trevor, I'll wreak chaos upon everyone and everything that I see, because that's who Trevor is, a psychopath. This was the real issue I had with the 4th game, as clearly the character, Niko Bellic, would not really be the kind to go crazy and drive a bus on the sidewalk while firing at pursuing cops. But, as a player, that's something I wanted to do. But regardless of that, in my opinion, there is not a single thing that Grand Theft Auto 5 did not at least improve upon over its predecessor. Hell, they even added an actual background score alongside the standard radio tracks, so that the missions, which in previous games have never had any kind of background music, now actually give you tunes to jam to. It also helps that the background score is really good. Speaking of the missions, those are one of the things that Grand Theft Auto 5 absolutely nails. So yeah, Grand Theft Auto 5 is an incredible entry to the already legendary Grand Theft Auto series, and that's why it's my 9th favorite game of the decade. Game number 8 is The Binding of Isaac, Rebirth, Afterbirth, Plus, and Knuckles. The original Binding of Isaac was a weird flash game that was released back in 2011 by Edmund McMillen, the creator of Super Meat Boy. It was a very strange game that had gameplay inspired by the original Legend of Zelda, combined with a very twisted take on the Bible. It also had an incredible soundtrack made by, once again, you guessed it, Danny Baranowski. I don't know if it would be correct to say that the original Binding of Isaac was the game that kickstarted the modern roguelike and roguelite genre, but to me it definitely feels like it was. However, it had a huge problem. Flash. Since the game was made with Macromedia Flash, it was very unstable and had major performance issues. The best way to fix this? Remake the game with a different art style, an entirely new soundtrack, which isn't by Danny Baranowski and it's not as good as the original soundtrack, and, most importantly, a new game engine built specifically for this game. And thus, The Binding of Isaac Rebirth was, reborn? Later down the line, the game also received 2 expansion DLCs, Afterbirth and the very cleverly and not confusingly named Afterbirth Plus. I bought the game roughly a week after it released back in 2014 and played it for a good 40 or so hours, but once it got the first Afterbirth DLC, I really started to rack up the hours. There is just so much content in the game, to a point where it's more or less infinitely replayable. I love all the different combinations you can get from items, and how if you can get just the right combination of items, then you can absolutely break the game and become so overpowered that you clear rooms upon merely stepping foot into them. The biblical stuff that is present in the game is weird and does make it look quite strange to anyone looking to try the game for the first time, but at this point when I'm playing I don't even notice that stuff. But, like I said, Isaac is what, in my opinion, started the surge of roguelikes and roguelites while being an absolute beast of a game itself, and that's why it's my 8th favourite game of the decade. I absolutely cannot wait for the Repentance DLC that's coming in 2020. Enter the Gungeon is basically The Binding of Isaac, but better. While I do love Isaac, there are 2 things that it doesn't do super well, and those 2 things are fairness and difficulty. The Binding of Isaac is not a very fair game, and a lot of the time your chance of victory in any Isaac run is decided by luck, and as such, so is the difficulty. Now, I'm not saying that there is no skill involved in The Binding of Isaac, I'm just saying that skill won't always save you in Isaac. Gungeon, however, does not work like Isaac does. Yes, there are still random elements, but it's a lot easier to deal with these elements if you are skilled at the game. And you need to be skilled at the game, or you will be absolutely floored by the first boss, provided you even make it that far. Enter the Gungeon is not an easy game, and is the reason it didn't immediately click with me the first time I played it. I was so used to just letting the items that I found in games like Isaac carry me to victory, that when Gungeon asked me to actually get good, I didn't like it. I'm so glad I came back to the game and stuck with it though, because once you actually do get good, it is so much fun. The most important thing that Gungeon brings to the roguelike table is the ability to dodge roll. Every character in the game starts with the ability to dodge roll at any point, by simply clicking the right mouse button, and while you're dodge rolling you are immune to damage. This is such a simple mechanic, yet since the entire game is designed around this, you have to master the art of the dodge roll in order to make it deeper into the Gungeon. Much like any other roguelike worth its salt, Gungeon has a lot of content to offer, and I mean a lot. It's got a lot of guns, loads of guns, heaps of guns, and for those of you who like guns, good news! It's got guns! Guns from movies, guns from other games, guns from space, meta guns are literally just the lowercase r. There are so many guns to be found in Gungeon, which is, well, expected to say the least. It's also gotten 3 free content packs since it came out. Roguelike gameplay and bullet hell are combined skillfully in Enter the Gungeon, and that's why it's my 7th favourite game of the decade. I had only ever played a single 3D platformer before I played A Hat in Time, and that was Super Mario 64, the DS. I thought it was good, but I didn't think it was incredible or anything. I remember hearing about A Hat in Time really early on in its production, sometime around 2013, and then completely forgetting about it until I saw it on sale on Steam sometime in 2018, and saying to myself, hey, that looks kind of fun. So I bought it, and the second I heard the theme music start playing, I knew I was in for something special. Y'all, I did not know video games could have this much charm. From the music to the characters to Hat Kid's expressions, everything is done incredibly well. The level design for each stage is nearly perfect. The first chapter of the game, Mafia Town, is a perfect place to get used to Hat Kid's different abilities and moves, and each chapter gets better from there on out. While I love all of the charm and characters of the game, I have to give most of the credit to gameplay. Hat Kid is a joy to control. You have standard movement, a double jump, the ability to ledge grab and pull yourself up immediately, wall jumping, and the ability to do a dash which you can cancel out of at any time. This might sound like a lot, but they all work together so well that you get used to it after only a few minutes of playing. The game also has quite an active modding community, which makes a lot of quality content. The game has also gotten 2 DLC updates since launch. The latest one, Nakusa Metro, adds a very fun new chapter to the game along with some other things, but the first DLC that came out for the game, Seal the Deal, is what really made me fall in love with the game. The chapter that the Seal the Deal DLC adds is kinda jank, and it's probably my least favourite in the game, but it's the other 2 things that the DLC added that matter. First is a mode called Death Wish, which is just small challenges on existing levels, but with the difficulty cranked up to 11. These challenges are crazy hard and really added a lot of replay value to the game. The other thing the DLC added was split screen co-op for the whole game. That's just incredible. After this update, I ended up basically replaying the whole game again, but with my sister, and once we did that, we just went and played loads of fan-made levels, some of which have the same care and quality put into them as the base game does. Oh, and also, Hat Kid can do a very smug dance, which is why A Hat in Time is my 6th favourite game of the decade. Look, 99% of people who regularly play video games have at least heard of Portal. The original Portal is a perfect game in my eyes. It's not too long or too short, it's funny, it's clever, it's innovative, and it has a perfect difficulty curve. The only thing that is keeping the original Portal off of this list is the fact that it didn't come out this decade, and that's how the list it had to have come out in between 2010 and now, which is 2019, and Portal, the original, came out in 2007, so it can't get on this. It can't be on this list. Portal 2, however, did come out this decade, and while it's not perfect, it's still an incredible game. Valve basically took the original Portal and said, hey, what if we took this and turned it into a playable Pixar movie? And then the bastards only went and did it. The story and characters are written exceptionally well. Stephen Merchant as the voice of Wheatley is iconic. I love Portal 2's story to absolute bits, but I won't be spoiling any of it here, just in case someone watching this video hasn't played the game. And if you are the person watching this video who hasn't played the game, then what are you doing? Go and play the game. It's a bloody masterpiece. Portal 2 got me thinking with Portals again, and that's why it's my 5th favourite game of the decade. For the longest time, Terraria was my favourite game. which is why I'm pretty surprised that it ended up in 4th place. Don't get me wrong, I definitely think the top 3 games deserve their spots, but if you had asked me what my favourite game was a few years ago, I would have 100% answered Terraria with zero hesitation. Terraria is a game that gets compared to other survival and crafting games quite a lot, which isn't really fair because Terraria at its core is not a survival or crafting game. It's actually more like an RPG with crafting and survival elements thrown in. The point of Terraria is to progress through weapon and equipment tiers until you can beat whichever boss you need to beat to progress, and then repeat until you finish the game. It is, at its core, a game about constantly getting the next best upgrade for your character, of which there are a lot, like hundreds. I remember when I first really got into the game was right after the huge 1.2 patch, which basically tripled the amount of content that was in the game at the time. I had been trying to beat the Wall of Flesh boss for ages, thinking it was the final boss of the game, only to later realise that the Wall of Flesh is more or less the final boss before the true game begins. Later, in 2015, the game got its biggest update ever, the 1.3 update, which added a true final boss to the game, a new mode called Expert, which is extremely challenging but also rewarding, giving players exclusive loot that can't be obtained on normal mode, and loads of other stuff. The amount of content versus the price tag is insane for Terraria, as you can pick up the game for ridiculously cheap nowadays. In Terraria, you can always dig deeper, and that's why it's my 4th favourite game of the decade. I don't understand how I even like it. It combines 2 things that I don't even really care about, cars and soccer. It's just car soccer. I shouldn't like this game, and yet, ever since I started playing it out of curiosity back in 2015, I've been hooked. It's currently my 2nd most played game on Steam, and I expect it to pass PUBG very soon. There really isn't much to say about Rocket League, to be honest. I mean, once you say it's soccer, but with cars equipped with big rockets, that's basically the whole story. I love the short match length, 5 minutes with the occasional overtime is the perfect length for a game like this. I love all the extra modes there are, like Rumble, which is a mode where you get random power-ups every 10 seconds, similar to Mario Kart. There's basketball mode for players with good air control, there's an ice hockey mode for players with good ground control. It's also the game that, in my opinion, has nailed the Battle Pass thing that a lot of games are doing nowadays. In Rocket League's Rocket Pass, even after you've gotten to level 100 and have gotten all the rewards, you keep getting new painted and special editions of those rewards every single time you level up, until the Rocket Pass is over and the new one begins. Plus, Rocket League might be one of the only competitive multiplayer games that I'm good at, which is one of the reasons why it's my 3rd favourite game of the decade. Which video game was made mostly by a single person, has god-tier music, has amazingly written characters and dialogue, has jokes that are laugh-out-loud funny, has a story that made me tear up a bit the first time I finished it, and managed to take one of the most boring types of combat, turn-based, and actually make it into something interesting? If you answered Undertale, then you are correct! Undertale is a little indie gem that came out in late 2015 and exploded into popularity, becoming an instant classic. I remember seeing loads of YouTubers covering the game at the time, but having no idea what the game was even about. All my friends were talking about it, so seeing that it was pretty cheap on Steam, I decided to just buy it and jump into it blind. I'm so thankful that that is what I decided to do, as having Undertale be spoiled for me would have ruined one of the greatest gaming experiences I've ever had, which is why I'm not going to spoil any of it here. If you like video games, then go and play Undertale. That's it, that's all you need to know about it. I know for a lot of these games I'm not even really talking about why I rank them so highly, but trust me, these games are exceptional experiences that you should go into knowing nothing to get the most out of them. Undertale filled me with determination, and that's why it's my 2nd favourite game of the decade. You all knew what number 1 was going to be. If you know me, or if you're even vaguely interested in video games, you knew what number 1 on this list was going to be. I don't know how many hours I've poured into Minecraft over the years, be it single player worlds or on multiplayer servers playing with friends. I've played the vanilla game, I've played it with huge mod packs that add thousands of new blocks and crafting recipes. I've spent hours watching other people play the game, be them friends or YouTubers. I've started up countless new worlds to play with my brother and sister. I started playing way back during the beta phase of the game, just before pistons were introduced. I remember when the adventure update came out and they added a hunger bar and enderman. Every update I would come back to the game and explore the newly added content. Me and my online friends, nearly all of whom I had met on the Minecraft forums, created our own server to play on. We had a survival world and a creative world, and during that summer, all I would do every day is play on that server. We all had our own bases in survival and we would trade resources. In creative, we would build huge sets and I would record videos and edit them together to make very, very low quality Minecraft shorts, which you can still watch on YouTube if you go to my old channel. Even the very first video on my old channel is a Minecraft video uploaded all the way back in 2012. It's very low resolution, I don't even talk in it, it's just me showing off a TNT cannon that I built. Eventually though, me and my friends got tired of the game and our server shut down. I would sometimes boot up Minecraft again only to have no desire to play the game, so I would end up only playing for a little while and then lose interest again, which is why I'm so glad that Minecraft got put back into the mainstream in 2019. Thanks to the 10-year anniversary and a load of YouTube creators breathing life back into the game, Minecraft got to be back in the limelight once more, which is where it rightfully belongs. Games today wouldn't be where they are if not for Minecraft. It alone kickstarted the survival and crafting genre, and it also perfected it, which is one of the reasons that Minecraft is my favorite game of the last decade. I don't think we'll ever get a game like Minecraft again, but that's okay, because we have Minecraft. Oh jeez, that video took a really long time to make. If you're still watching the video, I gotta say thank you, because it... I've never put anything together this long before with an actual script, and it turns out that I can't write for shit, and that it's really difficult to express my opinions through words. Who would know? Who would know? But anyway, thanks for watching my possibly 50-minute long video. I don't know, because I'm recording this part like as I'm 75% done with editing the video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope that maybe my ultimate goal here is, if any of these games on the list are interesting to you and you haven't played them, that you do go and play them, because that's all I really enjoy. I just like people to enjoy video games. If you disagree with me, feel free to leave your opinions in the comments. The entire 3 people that have finished this video, if you want to write comments, go ahead. If you want to like and subscribe, go ahead. But yeah, I don't know if I'll ever make any videos like this again, but it was an experience, to say the least. Merry Christmas, and have a good New Year. Yeah, have a good New Year. Yeah.